It got as far as a loaded gun and his finger on the trigger to his head. And he was ready to do it. And right before he pulled the trigger, he heard just like a soft voice, a whisper. And it basically said it's not too late to call for help. And those thoughts were so dark and so negative that he had to hold on so tight to the steering wheel. His knuckles were going right.
Wow.
Because he knew if he let go, he was going to do it.
We got an amazing testimony from a couple that actually I just ended up reaching out to on Facebook. I posted a video of another testimony, and this woman named Brandy commented on the video and shared a little bit about her testimony. And I thought it was amazing. And I wanted to hear more and possibly see if she would be willing to even share that on our platform as well. And I've never really done that before. And so I just went for it because why not? I sent her a message and asked her if she'd be willing. She went back, prayed about it, thought about it. And just a couple weeks ago or last week, I got to talk with her and hear her testimony. And now today, I got her and her husband here to share it live on our podcast. So I'm super jacked for Brandy and Logan. So here they are. Brandy, I want to hear from you about what came through your mind or how that process even worked, or how you saw that video that we posted, that testimony. You remember what I'm talking about on Facebook?
Yes. So it actually came at a really good time. I was actually out of state, away from my family, getting a stem cell transplant for my multiple sclerosis. So all summer I'd been gone. And what had really helped me get through that is watching testimonies, seeing different shorts and things like that. And I happened to scroll and I saw that woman's testimony in the Walmart parking lot. And I just thought, oh gosh, God is so amazing. And even though sometimes you hear other people's testimony and it seems outrageous or crazy, it's like, I believe it because I've seen what God did for us.
Mm-hmm. What was your initial thoughts when I reached out through the comments and messaged you? Do you think it was, a scam to take your money or something?
So I'll be honest, I made sure to click on the link and then went to the church website because I wanted to make sure if our name was attached to something that it really was like biblical and a real Christian church. I wanted to make sure. It did throw me off a little bit, but I was right in the middle of heavy recovery. So that's when I told you I'd have to reach out later. And then, yes, I was kind of investigating if it was true.
Like, what is this? But I'm glad that you trusted us enough to be able to tell your story. And I'm really glad that you guys are here because, just even our phone call and preparation for this was an encouragement to me. Hearing this. And so I'm really, and we prayed just before this that people that need to hear this will, and that God would begin to do something in their heart. So I'm excited because it is a cool story. And even having your husband here is just evidence of God's faithfulness and his goodness. So I think this will be really good.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
and I hope it reaches those who really feel hopeless.
Yeah. So do you mind just jumping into it and telling me,
Sure.
telling me this testimony of what God did in your life?
Sure. So this all was about 6 years ago around this time of year. Our marriage had just felt like it had really been going downhill. We were in counseling and stuff, but that particular counselor wasn't super helpful for us. Things were kind of getting worse. Our marriage just didn't feel much like a marriage. There was a lot of tension, a lot of walking on eggshells. There was not like one big thing. It wasn't like there was an affair. There wasn't like one big incident, but it was just years of piled up like resentment and anger that was happening. It just was not a very good environment. So during that time, I had been going to church and I would bring my son. My husband was an unbeliever at that time. He had grown up LDS and broke away from the church. And
You want to
religion
explain
is
what
not
LDS?
something we talked about.
You want to explain what LDS is for
Yeah.
people
So
listening?
like Mormonism,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, Latter-day Saints of Jesus Christ, I think is what the breakdown is.
Yeah.
And it's really prominent where we live too. And great people, but not quite the same biblical views that Christ shares in the Bible.
Yeah.
So breaking away from that, religion just was not something we talked about. Like he would tolerate it, I would say, when I take my son, but we didn't really talk about it. If we did, it usually caused fights. It was not a good topic for us. And I think that's important to remember as I tell my story, because I think it makes an impact a little bit later. So we were not doing good. We finally got to this place where it was not good. And I think it was the first time where I fully was preparing to do separation. Like I was looking, how do we separate our bank accounts? How do we make this happen? So on a Wednesday night, I went to church, and like I normally do, I sat there and I just kind of was angry that my husband wasn't with me. I can't remember if it was like a sermon about husbands leading or, families, but I just was really angry about it in a way, like I'd done many times. Afterwards, I went to the pastor. It was his last day for this church. And I was just, kind of hopeless. And I asked what I could do as a wife. And he was referencing, to keep praying for your husband, and a godly wife can help bring the husband around type thing. But I felt like that hasn't been working. Like, when is this going to happen? And so that night I finally said a prayer I was really scared to say. And I think part of it was I was scared to feel let down because I've said so many prayers and I didn't feel like they were always answered. And another part is I was scared what would happen if I said it. I think the prayer should come with a big warning, like things are going to get really bad and then they're going to get amazing. It was intense. So I asked God, it was a 2-part prayer. I said, God, do whatever you have to do to save Logan. And I'm thinking spiritually, like soul salvation. And then I said, please help my unbelief. Because I had gotten to a point where I was starting to really question things. Things were really not good in our household, our marriage. It just was hard when you feel that let down, I guess, and hopeless. And that's where I was. So I think I had that little mustard seed of faith that they talk about, like if even a little bit you give to God. And that was like, oh, watch what I can do. So that was like on a Wednesday night. And over the next 2 days into Friday, like the tension was there. On my end, I was starting to even privately talking to the counselor, like, how do I tell him? Do we need to come in? Do I tell him there? So I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to tell him, and he could sense it. He finally was kind of asking me about it. And I wanted to wait till the weekend after work and stuff. So on a Friday, ironically, Friday the 13th, I don't think it necessarily means like the superstition, but it helps me kind of remember. I had got home from work and he was already home. And he's not typically a drinker, rarely has beers and things. But by the time I got home, he was already drunk and continued to drink. So when I stepped in the door, I knew things probably weren't super good. He had tried moving a lot of his stuff down in the downstairs guest bedroom. And so it just was kind of rough because my son was home for those few hours. He's kind of confused what's going on. At this point, my husband, I imagine, just feels completely lost and helpless, like he's losing his family. We didn't officially talk, but it was enough said that we knew where the conversation was going to go. So that was really hard and awkward. And it was out of character for him too, I think, to get to that point. That was difficult for me to see because I grew up for part of my life in an alcoholic household. So I was already put on guard and really just, it was like a negative feeling in the house. Just it wasn't good. Throughout the night, things just continued to kind of get worse. At one point, he was messing, was it a rifle? Like he was cleaning a rifle or something. So he was downstairs and he'd been drinking and he still was drinking and he was messing with the gun. And it's weird to say, like, I didn't feel threatened, but I also realized this like is not a good situation. And my best friend, I was texting her and she's like begging me, like, you just got to go. You got to leave. Well, I tried calling my dad just to come talk to Logan. I mean, they banter and have fun, but he's respectful to my dad. And he was just like, so just belligerent. He's like, he wouldn't give the gun away. He's like, I'm not doing anything. I'm just cleaning the gun. You know, and my dad's like, Logan, you know better to drink and mess with guns, but he wouldn't give him the gun. And so after that happened and I just didn't feel like it was safe, I woke up my son. He was about 8 or 9 at the time. And we went to my Grammy's house. So after we get to her house, my son's in bed, he's sleeping, and I'm like frantically calling some of Logan's family members. Some of them didn't answer the phone. You know, it was kind of late. I think it was like 11 or 12 at that point. And some of them did answer the phone, but even though I was kind of pleading for them to please go check on Logan, no one would. And so I'm just feeling like desperate. I called the police. I kind of told them what was happening. I said, don't break down my door. I don't know if he's going to hear you. So I'll come back across town to let you in. And so I was doing that. And this is like early mid-October. And all of a sudden it starts like snowing. It was kind of weird. But it was starting to snow. And when I was coming down the street, I started seeing ambulances like just setting off to the side, and the whole street, the lights were not on, but the whole street with cops. And I felt sick to my stomach. I just thought, oh my God, like he did it. They were waiting for me to come in, and I let them know, you know, he had previous law enforcement training. He knows what to say. He knows what to do. So I made sure they knew that. When they came in, though, I remember just holding my breath and leaning over the stairwell, like craning my neck to like see if I could hear him. And I did. And then I was filled with anger. I was so mad. I was relieved, but I was so mad it got to that point. And I saw he had continued to drink. I saw the empty beer bottles. Basically what they said is he said he wasn't going to hurt himself. They couldn't really do anything. And she frankly said, you know, I'll be honest, if he's going to do it, he's going to do it. So if you don't feel safe, then go back to your grandma's, basically. Yeah, it driving back home and it's snowing. I don't think I've ever felt that hopeless before, because I literally, in my power, did everything I could. I called my dad. He tried to help. I called Logan's family. They weren't helping. I resorted to the police. Like there was nothing I could do anymore on my part.
Wow.
So it's weird to feel that hopeless when you think you've ran out of all your resources, which in hindsight, I should have ran to the first thing, which I'm going to tell you. But yeah, we tried to do things on our own sometimes and we make a mess of things. So I went back to my grandma's. I laid in bed next to my son. And I just was kind of silently crying. I've hardly had sleep the last like week just because of all the buildup and things weren't good. And I finally I had my eyes closed and I literally just like reached up and I said, if it's true and you're the God of always and forever and you did miracles in the past, I said, I need a miracle.
Wow.
Like I need you to help, God. And my eyes were closed and I heard this voice and it was kind of stern and it said, keep your eyes on me. And then it kind of got softer. And as he's talking, I see Christ on the cross and then it slowly zooms in, just his face. And he said, I have overcame the world. I can do anything. Look at what I've already done. And that's kind of where he showed himself on the cross, like spread out.
Wow.
And that's when he zoomed in and he said it softer and he just said, keep your eyes on me. I don't know how. I must have felt a lot of peace from that, though, because I was able to fall asleep at least just a few hours. So that was the second prayer. So that ended up being that Friday night, like middle of the night. So that was the second prayer. And then on Saturday morning, Logan and I started texting back and forth. Sometimes the tone was, sorry. Sometimes it was like angry. And then it started to change and it felt more like a final goodbye. I just was not, the tone of it felt like I was never going to see him again, basically.
Wow.
And that was hard. I'm still trying to, though, call the banks, trying to figure out, like, this is it. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to divide stuff? My son happened to go with my parents because it snowed. They're trying to get snow stuff. And I finally was trying to take a nap. I shut off my phone for a little while because I was tired of the texting back and forth. A little bit later, I woke up and I immediately got a call from his mom. And the first thing she said is, Logan's okay. We are at the hospital and he wants to see his son. That's all I heard. I didn't know anything besides that. So I made sure my dad rushes home so my son could be with me. And we go to the hospital. I remember shaking. I was so scared. And at first I lingered on the outside because I didn't know where we were. I didn't think he wanted to see me. I still had no clue what really happened, and his mom pulled me in. And when I saw Logan, like, he looked, I don't know if the best term is like shell shocked, but he was so pale. His eyes were just huge. Like, he looked kind of in shock. And he hugged on to my son a lot and just cried and told him how much he loved him. And he was willing to voluntarily go to like a mental health hospital to help with the immediate thoughts to harm self. And I was with him during the ER visit. I went with him. He allowed me to be with him during like the admission process. And on my side of things, I just always heard it was thoughts. That's all he ever said, is I just had strong thoughts to harm myself. So I'm thinking, okay, it wasn't that bad. Like, it wasn't good, but it wasn't that bad. And so this is where I guess I'll pause for a second and explain, I guess, what did happen to Logan.
Yeah.
If that's good. So on his side of things, that morning he woke up, empty house, his family's gone. He knows it's not going well. And he was really feeling hopeless. So he got to the point, which kind of sounds crazy. And the reason I kept bringing up it was snowing is that morning when he woke up, there was like almost 2 feet of snow. Like, there was snow everywhere. But what he ended up doing is grabbed a tent and put it in his car. Like, logically, that doesn't really make sense for the snow, but he was desperate and he was hopeless. He put his cell phone, which had active service, and he left it on the table because my dad had been paying our phone bill. So he didn't feel it was right to take it. I think he put like his debit card there too. So he put some weird stuff on the table and set it aside because he felt like he didn't need it. He also had written basically a goodbye letter, to my son.
Oh, wow.
The tone of it was definitely a goodbye.
Wow.
But what my son picked up on actually is one of the things my husband loves. Like, he'll look at it, but he puts it back in the styrofoam. He's so worried it will get damaged. It's a picture of my son and him as a baby. And it was one of his like Father's Day presents. And it means so much to him. So as I'm reading this letter, my son sees the mug and he starts crying. And he said, I don't think Dad was coming back.
Wow.
And so that's when it hit for him. Anyways, so going back to my husband's point of view, though, this time he's desperate. He throws things in the car and he's about to leave. And he had the thought, though, like, oh, I don't know anyone's number. I should probably get an old phone, for contacts. And what's amazing is the garage is it's messy. It's filled with things everywhere, but he knew exactly like under what pile it was. So he grabbed it and threw it in the car. And he's just thinking, okay, let's just get out of here, basically. And he made it less than a mile when he pulled into a parking lot. And he said he just had this overwhelming feeling like he was going to kill himself. That is what he was meant to do. That's what he was supposed to do. That's why he grabbed very little. And so he said it was just this overwhelming knowing that that's what he was going to do. It got as far as a loaded gun and his finger on the trigger to his head. And he was ready to do it. And again, this is someone that doesn't really believe in God. There's hurt in the past from religions and things. And right before he pulled the trigger, he heard just like a soft voice, a whisper. And it basically said, it's not too late to call for help.
Wow.
And he looked over and he grabbed his phone. Yeah. And even though it's out of service, you can still call 911. And even though like he may have known that in that thought, he clearly wasn't thinking right. And it was just that little voice, just that it's not too late to call for help. And he did. But he told me that feeling and those thoughts were so dark and so negative that he had to hold on so tight to the steering wheel. His knuckles were going white.
Wow.
Because he knew if he let go, he was going to do it. And so he was desperately, waiting for all the police to show up and to help him. And so all that happened. We go to the hospital, and that's why, he looked just shell-shocked between, I think, how hopeless, how close he got, and this weird thing happening to him of like a voice, And so from his point of view, it wasn't huge and dramatic. It wasn't like theatrical. It was just that small whisper of, it wasn't too late to call for help.
And that was when you saw him in the hospital.
My prayer was, remember.
And that was when you saw him you got to the hospital, and that's why he was so shell-shocked.
Oh, yeah. It's hard to even describe it. He was so pale, and his eyes just, you can tell he'd been through some stuff.
Okay.
And so I remember that prayer. It was 2 parts. And I said, do whatever you have to do to save Logan. Now, I meant spiritually, but as you can see, God is working on that part of it. But he saved him. I mean, seconds away from him not being here anymore. So he gets safely admitted to the hospital on that Saturday night. And I go to bed. I got woken up for a strange reason, basically. And I was trying to finally go back to bed. And I kept having a song playing in my head. And finally, I'm like, all right, let me grab my phone. Maybe if I hear the song, it'll stop. But when I went to play the song, I couldn't remember how to type in. I forgot what I was listening in my head to. So I remember literally crying out to Jesus. And so I remember there was a song, and I just typed in "cry out to Jesus," and it was Third Day. And that was playing it. And I just had this sense that I should be writing down the lyrics. So I'd write a little, pause to make sure I could get it, write a little bit. And I was watching the videos of just lyrics, not like the music video. And then I got the next song by them was actually saying, "I Need a Miracle." And I was like, I literally asked God, I need a miracle. So it seemed perfect. And I was writing down the lyrics. And then I started writing down specific Bible verses. And basically it's, that the 99, and I always felt like perhaps Logan would be the one that Jesus would pursue. He's that one, he's going to leave the rest to go get him. And, as I'm doing this, all of a sudden, and this was 3 a.m, I get this sense of a reality check, literally, oh my God, he is with me in this moment, in my desperation at 3 a.m, and he cares so much that he is with me. And I started to shake, and I kind of understood the whole fear the Lord, which I didn't understand before because, he's loving and all this. And it wasn't a fear that I was going to be hurt. It was just so much reverence and awe. I kind of felt so insignificant. But even then, look what God was doing. But what's interesting, and the reason I point that out, is at the bottom of the sheet. I wrote on it. I wrote on the bottom of the sheet with the lyrics, the scriptures, and I said, I can't explain it, but the Lord wanted me to share these specific verses with you. And remember, religion was not something we talked about. Like, that's probably the worst time to want to give someone who is angry. So the next day, this is like the full day. Logan's had a night's sleep at the hospital. I remember going to church, and I felt so overcome with emotion. I could stand, but I couldn't sing. And I just sobbed because I was telling God, like, asking him for forgiveness, because I was so always upset at my husband not being there. My focus wasn't on what God was trying to reveal. And I just felt, that I needed to tell God I was sorry and to forgive me and to forgive me on my wrongs. And I just felt this like wash over me. Like, I couldn't stop sobbing, but I just felt so much relief. After church, we packed some things for my husband. One of it were those letters of the songs and the lyrics and the Bible verses. And I go to the hospital, and this is my first time seeing him after he was admitted, really. And we both just hug, and we're sobbing, and we're both saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And he's hugging me, and he said, you'll never believe it, but I started to read the Bible. And if you wouldn't mind, could you please get me one that's easier to understand? And then he said, and if you wouldn't mind, could you give me some of your favorite Bible verses? So that seems like a simple thing, but it's huge. Wow. But then in my mind, I'm like, what is happening? And I start shaking, and I point to the nurse's desk, because you have to turn everything into them, so they can review it. And I said, I already did. It's at the nurse's desk. Because again, the night before, God kind of kept me up. And so it was just, I'm starting to think in my mind too, like, what is happening? Like, this is real. Like, what is happening? And I do want to point out, I actually didn't know how close Logan got to killing himself till actually several days later. So I didn't know that internal, like, thought process and stuff that he had, how close. What was amazing too is we both said we just felt lighter, like all that anger and resentment was gone. And that's a big deal, because we tried and we tried and we tried our way to make it work. We tried getting counseling. We kept trying, and nothing was working on our own. It just wasn't working.
Yeah.
And then, I put God in it, and I asked him to help. So there were other kind of God things that had happened for me, big, small, but just like, I prayed, help my unbelief. And it was kind of like, God's like, watch this. And so it was just mind blowing things that were happening in that time. And so Logan's at the hospital, he's getting his help, and all these God things just start piling up and happening. And I remember, like, okay, he saved Logan, and he's helping my unbelief. Like, holy cow. So during that time too, while Logan was away, I remember just getting really strong connected to God. And it's weird to explain, but the more I felt led to do stuff, like writing stuff down, it kind of felt the clearer God's voice became to me. Like, it's audible. It just felt like it was flowing, just like a relationship. And I remember thinking, people are going to think I'm crazy. And some of my friends are like, oh, I want to hear that. Like, I wish I could have that happen. And then I thought to myself, after everything we had been through, most people would say, oh, I wouldn't wish that on anyone, because it was our own personal hell. It was awful. But I thought, if that's what it took for someone to believe, then I would wish it on everyone.
Wow.
As awful as it was.
Wow.
Yeah. And in the mix of Logan being there, I remember just laying on the bed and just talking to God. And we'd been trying to have a baby. And so if you can imagine the mix, I'm like, this is a terrible time to have a baby.
Yeah.
And so we had been trying like 8 or 9 months. And I remember laying on the bed and I just told God, I said, we were trying so hard on our own. We were trying to figure out how to time it and all that. And I never once asked you if that's what you wanted for me. And I was just like, I never turned to you for guidance. I never asked. And God told me I was pregnant. And I just kind of sat there. And I don't know if you know women, but if they think they're even pregnant, they go nuts. They take like 1 million tests. Like we just go nuts over it. We really do. It's excessive. But God told me not to take a test. And so by this point, like if God told me to do something, I'm doing it. If he said, don't do it, I'm not going to do it. But just all these thoughts too, because I hadn't taken a test and I just kept thinking every time I went to the bathroom, like, okay, I'm gonna get my period or whatever. And I just remember God saying to me, like, I already told you you're pregnant and have faith type thing. And there were so many times he would nudge me to say something to this person or say something. And I'm thinking, they're going to think I'm crazy. I haven't even taken a test. Yeah. And all this is, our whole life is like exploding right now. Logan and I are coming home a few days later. And I remember us just like holding each other and cuddling. And at one point I grabbed his hand and I put it on my lower belly and he moved it. And then I did it again. And I think he kind of got what I was thinking with that. And I told him, God told me I'm pregnant. And I don't know if he knew what to think because all of so much had happened with him. But then he's seeing his wife going through all of these like God moments, we called them. And so he just kind of like, okay, because I also said I didn't take the test. And so over the days, I kept feeling nudged to do it, to tell people, but I didn't feel the courage to say something. Like I didn't listen. One night I finally shared it with a few people, like my, some close friends, my best friend, my grandma, and my sister. And the night before I took the test, I took a picture and it was in its wrapper. And God had me write the date on it. And he said, you will be rewarded for your faith and obedience. So I took the picture of that.
Wow.
Like, okay. So I told a few people who knew everything that was going on. The next morning I woke up super early. I felt like God just kind of woke me up and he's like, go take the test. And I normally wear glasses, didn't have it on, and I go to take the test. And normally when you take like the line test, it goes all the way through, tells you the test is accurate, and then like you're pregnant. And as it's like processing, it is like blaring positive, like there's no doubting it. And I remember just crying. And I don't know if I audibly said this or if it was just in my head talking to God, but I remember like, what is happening? And I don't understand. Like, I remember saying, I'm nobody special. Like, why are you doing all this? And he just said, you're special to me. And I just felt so loved and so cared for, from everything that had been happening. And I lay back in bed and I'm kind of sobbing, and Logan wakes up and he's trying to reassure me because he probably thinks the test was negative. And I just remember telling him like, no, you're not understanding. Go look in the bathroom. And he did. And then he kind of came back to bed and just, I think, didn't know how to process it. And so there were lots of little God stuff that had happened that involved other people. It was interesting how he's like reaching out, making sure other people are involved and witnessing what's happening.
Yeah.
But I do want to make something very clear. So all this great things seemed like they were happening. Logan was in the hospital for a few days. About a day or two after he got home, the only thing I can say is it was like spiritual warfare. It's hard to describe how awful the feeling felt. Like I felt like God and we were like one. We were having conversations. I felt his presence. But for some reason, I had this overwhelming doubt and like a voice just like, you're crazy. None of this is happening. You're not special. God's not doing any of this.
Wow.
You tell people, they're all going to think you're crazy.
Hmm.
And so I literally had to I have this thought, and then I have God like trying to reassure me. And I felt like I was going crazy. And then God just said, look at Logan. And I did. And I remember, okay, Logan is here.
Wow.
Like that is evidence. Like Logan is here. And so it was really awful. I remember I couldn't even go to work. I rushed. I seemed frantic at church. They probably thought I was nuts because I'm like, I need to speak to a pastor. It was hard to go back to church for like a little bit, but I did. But it was an awful, awful feeling. And that happened, in the mix of all these great things happening, that like struck me. And then it happened again about 2 days later. I woke up and the same just deep dread feeling that none of this is true. None of this happened. And even though I'm like feeling and hearing from God, it was such an awful feeling.
Wow.
And that's, God warns you not to trust feelings.
Yeah.
And so I just kept reminding myself, Logan's there. Well, poor Logan, he wakes up to me like rocking back and forth in the bathtub. And I'm blaring some of the songs I had listened to when all that was happening. So he comes in there, he sees his wife. He's gone through a lot, the past several days. So he goes out and calls my Grammy, like, I don't know what's happening. Like, we need help. And my grandma's very spiritual, and she was involved with what was going on. But I remember during that time, God told me to lay down in the water, like enough that my ears, are underneath. And I don't know if you think about, but what happens when you do that is it cuts out all the noise and you can hear your breath and your heart. And God said, take a breath. So I took a breath and he said, that was a gift. And he said, take another one. Took another one. And he's like, that was a gift. And then I could like feel my heartbeat starting to come down. And I'm just kind of dialoguing kind of with him. Like, I don't understand. I really felt we needed to separate. What do we do? Are we supposed to separate, And he reminded me there were 3 days where Logan was away and we had separated, and he kind of restored us. I was thinking of our marriage like a rackety shack, and we kept, trying to put more wood on, trying to fix it up. But what God had to do was just wipe it clean, just to the foundation. It was painful. Like I said, It wasn't, I think those prayers should be the warning, but I think they need to be said. And so I just told God too, as I'm like dialoguing with him, my head under the water, and I said, I don't feel that anger and resentment anymore. And God said, that's a gift. And I kept telling him, like, this is so much for me. I don't know if I could keep doing this. And he said, it's going to be done. It's over. Wow. And so by the time my grandma got there, she had been really just crying. And she's like, I'm so worried for you. I don't know how much you can take of this. I have that underlying diagnosis of multiple sclerosis too, and all the stress and lack of sleep. And I said, no, Grandma, God said it's going to be done. And it was over those 10, 12 hours. I could just feel my body, it took time, but it was coming down. I felt peace. I felt relieved. I no longer felt that negative presence or feelings. And it was done, like God said. But I think it's important to share that because it seemed like we were on cloud 9, like it went from bad, then to all of a sudden like cloud 9, but it didn't stay there. The enemy was trying to attack.
It became a choice at that point for you. I think that's important to mention for people that are listening. I talk to so many people that, and you see it, on social media, people that have had a real experience with God and they end up walking away. And that's what God revealed to me. I remember there was this lady, I do TikTok lives, and I evangelize. And there was this lady that ended up coming on, as I'm talking about Jesus and my testimony. And she apparently, I don't know who I was, getting into the ring with, but she was an author, which I don't know how big the book was, but she was smart. And she was an ex-evangelical, someone that had walked away from the church and has made it her mission to now attack the church and people of the faith. That's really what she was trying to do. And really, devalue my experience and who God is, and just was, and she was just hit after hit. I'm not going to lie. She pummeled me, and I walked away from it, and I had a convo with God, because I wasn't like, my faith wasn't shook, but it was weird because there was something else I was struggling with. And it was like fear, because I was like, this lady, she had, I think the problem is, if someone walks away from the church, we say, oh, they were never saved, or they were never they never had anything authentic. And I don't ever believe that. What scared me was when she was talking to me and she was sharing her experience. She'd been like a Christian for like 20 years and a pastor's wife. Like she's been a Christian living with the Lord longer than I have. And now she is just so vehemently against the church. And I was like, God, where did that go wrong? Like, what happened there? And God, would you keep my heart protected from that? The problem is, and God started to unpack, because I was struggling. How do people have such a real experience and they walk away and deconstruct? And God showed me, we're connected to a vine. One of the things Jesus says before he leaves earth, he tells his disciples, he says, I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing. The problem is when people deconstruct, I say a better word is they disconnect. They don't deconstruct. If deconstruction leads you to, leaving your faith in Jesus, you didn't deconstruct, you disconnected. And the war between the flesh and the spirit, Satan's got you in his pocket. And why when we talked about this, I really wanted you to share that, because literally that spiritual warfare is what so many people fight and so many people lose. And then what happens is they become those thoughts you were talking about. They end up coming into agreement with those thoughts and becoming bitter, failing to realize that what they're siding with is the voice of the deceiver. But God has given us a choice. There's always a choice between the tree of life and the tree of knowledge of good and evil, self-reliance or trust. It's impossible, the Bible says. It is impossible to please God without faith. And I think you are a perfect example of this walked out. And what would you, I love your story. And I love that, you include this, because I don't think people talk about the aftermath. We have this Jesus high, we have this experience. Oh, yeah. And then people have these battles that no one talks about, and people walk away because they're like, oh, it's not a feeling anymore. Like, what would you say to people that, are maybe going through that spiritual war, and they feel like they're losing the battle, or they're not identifying the feeling aspect of things?
Yeah, I definitely think we have to be careful, kind of like the Bible says about feelings, right? They're fleeting. How many times are we wrong about feelings? If they're currently doing it, I want them to know, like, they're not alone. They're not crazy. The enemy's trying to deceive them. And to remember, even though it doesn't feel good, even when you're in it, but like God, has you. And Satan will do what he can to get you, because he knows you're valuable. He knows if you share your testimony, if you share what's happening, then you're glorifying God. He doesn't want that. So he wouldn't be coming at you so hard if you weren't valuable, if you didn't have something. And something else, I think it's important. I've had many struggles and hard things over the years. About 2 years after that, I was almost killed in a really terrible accident. I was a hospice nurse going to my patient's home, and it was a beautiful day. I mean, I'm literally praying seconds before it happens, just, God, thank you for such a beautiful day. And a passing semi dropped a large rock. I have it. It's huge. It came off the road and through my windshield, and, I crashed. My face was busted up. Wow. I was unconscious. And so there were so many people, though, that were so angry about what happened. And here I am, like, and barely talking stuff. And I'm just like, oh my God, God saved me.
Yeah.
And to go back and look at the wreck scene, like my car had left the ground, but it didn't roll. It didn't flip. If it happened sooner, I would have crashed on the bridge over that water I was praying. So there's so many things I was able to look at that didn't happen that would have made more sense. And I think because I had that previous testimony, even though nothing felt good in the moment, our lives were in shambles in a different way, I could hold on to what I knew was true. And the Bible's great, and I love that. And you should old stories, but just like I prayed, like if it's true you did it then, I need it now. And I think it's important to look back on. When it happened, I remember when they brought the rock to show us, this is what hit you. I remember telling the police officer, please tell the driver that I forgive him. On a personal level, I could only imagine how bad he would have felt. And I had people in the room like, why would you forgive him? And so that happened. Just because you're a believer, it really doesn't mean life is perfect.
Yeah.
Over the summer, like I said, I was separated from my family for about 3 months, getting aggressive chemo, killing my immune system to regrow back. That's why I'm finally getting hair. But, and people said, well, how did you do that? And it was strictly relying on God and meditating on what he's already done and trusting the facts, not always the feelings, but the facts of it.
Exactly.
And so I think people need to realize that things are still going to be hard, but like you said, you have the choice. I could disregard everything I knew to be true, or I could lean into God again and know that if he helped me through it, then like he is with me, and he knows, he sees things I don't. He knows where to help me and how to push me to my limits so I can lean into him.
So good. Logan, do you want to say anything in closing or?
Not a whole lot. I mean, she kind of had her experiences and there were scary times through it all. And I think that, some of the greatest things we've been given as gifts is kind of just, almost like a reset. In a lot of ways, relationships are hard when you hold on to a lot of resentment for the other person. And we're told to forgive wholeheartedly, but who really knows what that feels like? And there have been a couple times in our relationship where it's like, okay, here's that clarity, here's that reset, start over, and to actually feel what it feels like to forgive wholeheartedly and to start fresh with that. And that wasn't anything we did. That was a gift a couple of times in our lives. Wish I could do that on my own, but it definitely shows you how important that is and how important it is to work towards that. And the mental clarity is what got me, because, there was so much hectic things going on, so much of everything. And then when I just, sitting in the hospital, and it's like everything just went away.
Wow.
The resentment, the anger,
wow.
All those things that just pile on you in life, like they just completely disappeared. And it was like getting a complete fresh start.
Wow.
And that was, it's something you have to work for. It's not always a gift. And I think what we were given was that incredible moment of clarity, and we saw that proof of what is working in our lives. And like you said, some people leave, some people after a long period of time, and it's because they say they don't feel that anymore, and it's because you have to work for that feeling. So the gift that we were given of that was immense. But I know that we need to seek him out. We need to work on that clarity ourselves. We need to work on forgiving wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
And to try and get back to that point where I felt that way, where all that stuff was gone. But that's what we have to work towards.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because since then, it's not like everything sunshine and rainbows. We've had huge life events. And just, I think for me, and maybe just from what he said, it kind of sounds like maybe for him too, when we kind of start to feel those little things piling up again, for me, I try to like check myself and like, that was such a gift that happened. To me, it would almost feel like slapping God in the face. Like,
that's a good point. Yeah.
Letting that gift go. But I think it's important to realize it's not like sunshine and rainbows all the time. Like we still have to work at it. And when we lose sight of God and we don't put him in the middle, we can see the effects that happen.
Yeah. And so for you guys that are watching this and listening to their story, there's a couple things that I want you to think about, because it's so true with them. Because I hear this all the time. They're like, Alex, I don't feel it anymore. I feel like I'm lukewarm. I feel. There is a choice, like what we were just talking about, where you get to choose to trust in what God said and what he had promised, and believe him that he'll bring you through this next season. Or you can come into agreement with the lies of the enemy and doubt and point a finger at God. You look at the Israelites, literally look at God's ministry to the Israelites, where they saw, people always tell me, well, if I saw it, then I would believe. No, it's always a heart issue, because the Israelites saw a Red Sea split in half. The God of miracles that Brandy talked about, this is the God of miracles that split a Red Sea in half so they could walk through on dry ground, and defeated their enemies that were in pursuit. And these people, they get to the other side, and there was some time in between, but they ended up worshiping a golden calf. You're a fool to think that we have somehow evolved to a place where we, no longer deal with that anymore. Or, how stupid are they? There is nothing new under the sun, like Ecclesiastes says. Nothing is new. It's the same thing over and over. And the human heart is the same. And it's always a choice to choose from the tree of knowledge of good and evil, choosing self-reliance, choosing what makes sense, and looking at the world and letting your environment dictate your faith, or believing God and his promise and not letting your environment dictate your faith. As people of faith, this is what we do. We don't believe because we see. We believe in things that are hoped for that we don't yet see. And this is what produces joy. So it's a choice. And if you're a Christian, this is what it's all about. You can choose to come into agreement with what God has already said about you. And if you don't know, I'm looking for a Bible next to me, but you need to open your Bible, and you need to replace the cynicism. Like I love how Brandy put it. She literally, she put her head underwater so she couldn't hear anything else. Sometimes you need to go like this, because when you start listening to gossip, it starts, just about anyone. If you start listening to gossip about someone, your heart begins to change towards them. You need to stop listening to gossip about God. People that are gossiping about God, you need to trust in what he has already said and choose and believe in him, because it is a choice. But I want to thank you guys, Brandy and Logan, for hopping on here and sharing your testimony. And for those of you that are watching, God bless you. I pray that this changed your heart, and that you would cry out to Jesus and you would call on the God of miracles, because I'm telling you, he really does answer. And when you draw near to him, James 4:8 says he will draw near to you. God bless you. And we'll see you next time.